Celebration Day. We have pulled out all the stops here at SILB Productions.
Yeah.
I am Willie Sparks. I got my men. I got my happily married merrymen over here, as you will. The rock and roll merrymen.
Yeah.
Bert Hara to my left, and Mr. Sasha Ploner
On the right.
the blues king of Austria to my right. All right, now.
And we celebrate Mr. Eddie Van Halen.
Yes,
That's right.
as
That's
some of
right.
you
Rest
may
in
know,
peace.
yes, rest in peace.
Yeah.
Eddie had a long battle with cancer, and I think this has probably been going on for good at least 25, if not 30 years he's been battling cancer. I first heard about it, I was in high school, maybe even earlier, when Van Halen got the news that that he has cancer. Now, with that note, I'm going to turn this guitar down because it's going to make some noise, and I'll have to explain what that noise is about and what all the huddle and fussle is here in a minute. But as you remember from the pop quiz video, from last video, who was it that he was the first to put a Gibson pickup into a Fender guitar? Well, as some of you see here, I have a Fender limited edition, Fender Player Series Stratocaster. I'm not trying to advertise for Fender.
Actually, it's a performer.
It's a performer. Excuse me. It's a Performer Series Stratocaster. I heard about the Player Series. Now they have a Performer Series that's coming out. Fender is doing some amazing things. They're really bringing back what the true American Fender sound was, which is nice because they really hit it hard when they tried to get out of the CBS days. Fender, little spoiler warning, Fender had some competition heads and competition firsts in the electric guitardom, so to speak. And in 1965, Fender ended up selling his stuff to CBS Corporation. Well, CBS ended up selling a lot of that stuff to China, and as we know, it went dinky-donky-dong-dong downhill quick.
Did somebody know that Leo Fender never played guitar?
I remember hearing that.
I did not know that. I knew he was. I knew that he was a radio repairman.
Yeah.
And he learned how to make lap steels from guys like Joaquin Murphy, I think. Joaquin Murphy, Roy Smack. Well, Roy Smack was on the East Coast. Never mind. That was Gibson. But this is not about Fender. But Fender was the responsibility for this pop quiz answer, and that Eddie Van Halen used this guitar type to put a Gibson humbucker, a Gibson humbucking pickup. I'll explain what a humbucking pickup is. No, I did not mean to say hamburger. It is a humbucker. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. Put a humbucker into the bridge position. The bridge is right here on the guitar. And as you can see, there's a little bar sticking up. And that little bar, if you play a string and you go, that's what Eddie sounded like.
Yeah.
So, with that, I'm plugged into Mr. Bert Hara's pedal board and amplifiers here, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit how the guitar, an electric guitar and amplifier work. And I'll explain what Eddie Van Halen did in the 70s. Now, an electric guitar is basically two pieces of solid wood with a piece of plastic to kind of cover, we call it a pick guard, but it's to cover the cavity on some guitars. And on other guitars, they have a little route out back here underneath the bottom of the guitar where all the electronics, though that's Gibson type guitars. But Fender guitars, they have the cavity under this plastic pick guard. And on the pick guard are your three pickups, except for what Eddie Van Halen did. And we'll talk about that in a minute. The pickups, all they are, Yes, they look like little pieces of plastic with screws in them, and they have like little metal rods sticking out. Well, actually, if you take these little pieces of plastic off and you look inside of a pickup, you'll find that a guitar pickup is essentially nothing more than an electromagnet. It is a coil of wire with six individual. It's with six individual magnets, and the wire is wrapped around these magnets. And it's not just wrapped around these magnets. It has what's called a bobbin. That bobbin is kind of the plastic framework that wraps the wire, that holds the wire in place around the magnets. And you have six of these. In this guitar, you have six magnets. On a Les Paul or a Gibson type guitar, you would have a different setup. You would have, instead of these little rods coming up, these magnetic rods coming up, you have screws that are called pull pieces because the magnets sit below the pickup cover. I'll show you a Les Paul in a later video. But in this case, you have two types of pickups. What I'm holding here is a Stratocaster guitar made by Fender, and it has three single coil pickups. Single coil means nothing more than it is just a single coil of wire wrapped around about between 2,000 and 6,000 turns of wire. Sometimes more if in the case of Stevie Ray Vaughan, he had like 8,000 turns of wire. That's what we call overwinding. And that can actually play a big part. If you overwind, it increases the low end of a pickup. It makes it hotter, and it makes it do things that if you don't have this pedal board that's in front of me over here.
Actually, it's way out of sight.
Way out of sight.
You try to get a picture of it and sneak it into the video and put it together.
But if you don't have a pedal board, but you have a really good tube amp, or at least an emulation of said tube amp, you can, with the overwound pickups, you can really make a guitar roar. But this guitar is just stock pickups, Fender's new line of pickups, actually. And all these are just single, it's just a single coil of wire wrapped around six magnets. Now, as guitar amps got louder, you started having additions between the guitar and the amplifier. And what you're hearing over there is the amplifier. The amplifier is humming because, guess what? The guitar is also humming. The guitar, when you have these pickups on, is like a giant antenna, and it picks up lighting. It picks up the sound. It picks up the radio waves from the lighting on a stage or on a camera or on a video. Then if you move this switch a little bit to the next position, this is a 5-way switch. This selects the different pickups. This is the bridge pickup. This is middle and bridge. This is middle. This is middle and neck, and this is neck. Now, you have positions 4 and 2. These are what is called humbucking. Now, what does that mean? Okay, this middle pickup is reverse wound, and it has what's called a reverse polarity, which means the magnet rods poles are pointing in a different direction, as well as the wire is turning a different direction from the other two, from this back and front pickup. And because of this reverse winding, it cancels any noise out, and that's why you can get the 2 and 4 positions on a Strat as humbucking. And so, but Gibson, with the help of an engineer by the name of Seth Lover, made a pickup like that before, long after the Strat was invented. Strat was invented in 1954. But the humbucking pickup didn't come about until 1957. Don't tell that to the Czechs, because the Czechs came out with it in 1955. But the first American pickup.
I'm holding the Les Paul here just so that sighted folks can see the difference between the Strat and the humbucker pickups
Yep.
on the Les Paul.
Now you'll see, and notice on the Les Paul, you have these very large pickups. That's actually two single coil pickups put together. I'm going to turn this down a minute so that you don't hear you don't hear any hum in the amp. But you have two of these pickups, these small pickups, put together. But one of them, again, is reverse polarity. And because it's reverse polarity, which means if you have a north-facing magnet underneath the strings, a set of north-facing magnets, that means if it's in reverse polarity, it's just flipped over upside down. So the magnets face south and the wires are turning in a different direction. Let's say if the wires on a coil are on the bridge and neck pickup, they're going clockwise. The middle is going counterclockwise. Let's say on this Les Paul, the extreme bridge coil and the extreme neck coil are doing the same thing. You have clockwise movement of the wire, and then the two middle coils have it counterclockwise. That's why they cancel out the hum. So that's the explanation between single coils and humbuckers. Now the next thing that happens is that sound goes from there to an amplifier. And the amplifier makes every bit of difference. Can we turn off that fuzz over there, or that DS1 over there?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we can just get the nice clean tone of an amplifier. I'm going to show you something here. Now, what a lot of guys in rock and roll used to do. This here is a Fender Tone Master Deluxe. This is basically a replica model of what a 1965 deluxe amplifier would have been. And if you turn the volume barely up on the guitar, this is the whammy bar. I'll use that. Move that out of the way in a minute. But right now, I'm just going to.
Sounds like the Shadows or something.
Yeah, no. Yeah, with a whammy. Yeah. You know that's the Shadows. They did a lot of that with the whammy bar. But I'll talk about the whammy bar in a minute. What that does. But this amplifier here, oftentimes is right now cranked up really loud. All the volume is cranked up. The controls, you have treble and bass controls, and those are usually set flat or in the middle, where they're at the 12 o'clock position. For those that are blind here, and then you have a reverb control which simulates an echo. If I turn this volume knob all the way wide open, watch what happens. You have distortion. Now what happens is, the way an amplifier works is you have, and normally if you had tubes in those days, you had the signal goes through to what's called the preamp section. That just boosts up the power. All that does is it does nothing more than takes the signal and amplifies it. That is the amplifying part. The real meat in the matter, what is powering the speakers, is what's called the power section. The signal goes then through the power section and gets powered up even more, along with the fact that it's powering the speakers, and that's how you get your tone. And when you crank up a tube amp, the sound of the distortion that it causes is simply because the tubes are at their maximum capacity of being able to process that signal before it turns into trash. And that's because of the power supply to the amplifier, otherwise known as a rectifier. And when you have that, you can get this nice. You get this kind of compressed sound. And that is the sought after tone in a tube amp. Now, what Eddie Van Halen did, because the tone was pretty much lock, stock, and barrel the same way. You had either, you know, if he was playing a Strat, you either had the bridge pickup, bridge and middle, and neck, and you couldn't really do much, because even if you started on the bridge pickup, let's say, and you wanted to do an Eddie Van Halen lick, you don't hear that attack so much. So what Eddie Van Halen started to do, he realized that with one of his amps that he bought, they mistakenly sold him an amp that was rated for a higher amount of electricity for the European standard electricity. And because of that, he cranked the amp up all the way. And it sounded really good, but it was at like such a really low volume. So he figured out that if he took what was called a variable AC control, otherwise known as a variac, he could change how much electricity goes to the amplifier, and therefore how much volume he produces. Comfortably, he could do a full show with a 100 watt Marshall amplifier cranked all the way up at 80 volts instead of 120 volts of electricity. All this to say, if you change certain variables in your amplifier, either the electricity flowing into your amplifier, or you change other parts of your signal, for instance, using pedals, you can get massive results. Well, Eddie Van Halen, back in the 1970s, he could not afford pedals. Pedals were not very cheap back then, and they were something for, you know, guitarists who were well off. And Eddie Van Halen had moved from Holland to the U.S. with his father, who was a clarinetist, classical clarinetist, and they were all learning music, and they all formed a band together. All the Van Halen boys formed a band. And his son currently is the head of the band now. And they're going to continue doing all of the Eddie Van Halen stuff to keep that music alive. So now you have Eddie Van Halen had passed away last Tuesday with his long battle of cancer, and he has a lot of things that were accomplished, and even guitars, replica guitars of his, you can buy in the store today. Some of them starting as low as like $500. You know, it's really not that bad.
That's a good price.
It's a very good price. But of course, if you're a beginner and you ever wanted to start on electric, you could use a Squire. And pedals are not that expensive now. You can buy pedals, and Bert, I don't know if you can squeeze the camera over to the to the pedal board.
I will carry it over.
And
But you have to be careful. There's a joke. Guitar players tell jokes about what you are, a guitar player or a tap dancer.
yeah.
Yeah, I know. Sasha and I go back and forth. I love my pedals. Sasha doesn't like them so much, but I love
the pedals are great.
I love the fun that you can have with pedals.
I'm not a big pedal user. I put it that way.
Yeah.
Pedals are great, but it's.
So that's the pedal board, and he has various different pedals on
I
it.
have to mention, as far as I know, for example, Angus Young of AC/DC didn't use any pedals. Keith Richards didn't use any pedals. But anyway,
Yeah,
or not a lot, or not in a
yeah.
not a lot. I put it that way.
Eric Clapton, also Stevie, not so much too,
Yeah.
but
There's no right or wrong. It's your preference.
Yeah.
It's what you can afford and your preference and
Yeah.
what is fun. You know, my advice is never let anybody else's likes or dislikes influence what you like
Yeah,
or dislike.
exactly.
You
Yeah.
know?
because rock and roll, in the words of Eddie Van Halen, is all about reinvention.
Yeah.
All about reinventing yourself to sound good. Now, I can get the very same Van Halen sound. I don't even need a Gibson humbucker anymore in the back pickup of this guitar to get it sound good. I was experimenting with some of Bert's pedals over here, and I found actually a really nice tone with either his fuzz. He has a fuzz pedal, which kind of creates the sound like Jimi Hendrix got, and the reason why they created the fuzz pedal was so that Jimmy wouldn't have to poke holes in his speakers every concert, because that's what he would do. He'd go around before every concert, and he would just deliberately poke holes in his speakers. But now you don't have to do that. Now you can just crank out a fuzz face clone or a big muff fuzz. There's so many different fuzzes out there.
What wasn't at that time in around about Hendrix time in the studios of the world that they just had to do it with kind of studio effects that kind of that some sounds that come out of the records at that time.
Actually, that's an interesting thing that you mentioned that, because a little side note, Marty Robbins' record. I'm going on a tangent here, but to prove a point. This was a fluke, actually. This was a very bad mistake. There was a Marty Robbins record that was produced back in 1961, and that was called Don't Worry. And Grady Martin happened to be the studio guitarist on that session. Well, a tube busted in the channel on the mixing console that he was plugged into. And so the sound that he got, because he busted the tube, when he went to raise the volume on his guitar, he got this fuzz sound.
Okay.
And so what he did was then he created a box
Okay.
that he could plug into that did the same effect. And then of course word got around, and the fuzz face was born out of Grady Martin. But it didn't get popularized until Jimi Hendrix in 67, 68, 69. So that is the thing about fuzz. They didn't have so much, studio effects were good, but mostly compression, reverb. Certain mic preamps had certain compression, and this, Neve mic preamps were just coming on the scene, but studio had nothing to do with what the guitar player was doing.
Okay.
Most of what the guitar player was doing had to deal with a lot of their guitars sitting literally on top of their amplifier and just using the feedback from the guitar through the amp. This is, I'm going to kind of keep this at a minimum here, but the guitar, when you think of the guitar and the amplifier combined, that is what in Japanese would be called a dojo. The amplifier is a dojo, which is an extension of the guitar. The dojo is an extension of oneself. When you play guitar like this, you have the guitar. Your fingers beat the guitar. And the guitar is an extension of your fingers, and the amplifier is an extension of guitar, which is an extension of your fingers. And this magical tone that you get, that is the result of an amplifier and a guitar working together. And if you have any pedals, let's do that. Now let's crank up some DS1, some distortion here. And I'll show you kind of a sound that is as close to the Eddie Van Halen sound as you're gonna get.
All right. Hey.
I remember the first time I ever heard Eruption at my friend's house. He pulled out the disc and he said, listen to this, and no one had ever heard anything like that before.
Nope.
It was freaking amazing. Yeah. What he could get out of a guitar was, yeah, completely changed the guitar world.
Yeah.
Yep. And I remember the first time I heard another kid in high school do that. And then I heard somebody do the Cliffs of Dover. Eric Johnson was like, something like that. Yeah. Very technical guy, Mr. Eric Johnson. I met his bass player one time. That was cool.
Really?
Yep. I met
Did you ever saw him live?
Never saw him live, but I met his bass player, Chris Marsh.
Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful man to talk to. I was actually at a club, and I was in an opening band. I was bass player with this band. It was a power trio, and George Stunberg was at the club, and he's one of the major reputable sound guys in Austin. If you happen to work with him, you're something.
Did he work with Stevie?
No, Stevie's on the West Coast.
Okay.
No, he didn't work with, no.
Because Stevie was from Austin, I guess.
Stevie was from Austin, but Stevie moved out west.
Okay.
Stevie wanted to get away from Austin, actually. So actually, Stevie ended up working more with Dumble.
Okay.
Dumble amplification, which was pretty much his main amp for the rest of his career. Started out with basements, 58 basements, usually using a tube screamer to push it. But Eddie Van Halen, man, he never used any pedals to push his amps. The only thing he did was he put a humbucker in to the back of the guitar. And not only that, these pickups are supported with, they have springs on the screws so that the pickup can stay at a certain height. You can actually adjust these with a screwdriver. No, Eddie just went balls to the walls and just hard mounted them straight to the guitar body.
Yeah.
And that is another thing that's part of his sound. And also, as I said in the other video, he was the first to wax pot his pickups. And now everybody wax pots their pickups. Even Fender wax pots their pickups. And even still, when Fender wax pots their pickups, you can still hear it. You can even hear the springs underneath in the whammy bar. Now that's another thing about the Stratocaster that made it unique.
It's a nice wait a moment, just a nice overtone. It's like normally you do that with kind of fretting, kind of flageolet tones, like.
Yeah.
But if you do that,
it's a little off, a little out of pitch, but you could probably even tune the springs to that.
Okay.
I wouldn't wonder. But I've never seen anybody nerdy enough to do that. Perhaps Van Halen did, I don't know. But Van Halen was known for using Floyd Rose whammy bars, which is another type of whammy bar. Now let me explain what a whammy bar is. Okay, so you have a bridge. The bridge is right here. It is supported It is what's called a floating bridge. It is supported by 6 screws in the front that hold it in place, and the back is allowed to move up and down. And the only thing that keeps that back in that same position is a set of springs. Underneath there are usually three springs. If you have heavier strings, like if you're Stevie Ray Vaughan, who used 13 gauge strings.
We have to explain that. Kind of a summarize. The string gauge has something to do with the sound. Some people are crazy enough to have very thin strings like 7s, like Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top.
Yep.
And some people like Stevie Ray Vaughan have 13s, which are like trees. Normally on electric guitar, people are between 9 and 10. 9, 10, maybe the strong one's 11.
I use a 12 one. When I play jazz, I use like with my jazz. I use a 12, and most of the time, otherwise, I use 11s.
Okay.
Now, what do these numbers mean? These numbers actually are measured in thousandths of an inch.
Okay. And it starts with
The thinnest string
with the thinnest string.
is the gauge of the thinnest string would be 9, 10, 11.
Yeah.
And then they go on up to what, 40,
Yeah.
50,
You can go up into the 40. You have, let's see, this looks like it has 10 to 46s on here. So you have 10, 13, 17, 26.
Actually, you start at 9, so yeah.
Oh,
But,
9 to 42, yeah.
But you get the idea.
Yeah, you get and the 42 would be the bass string, which is this string here. So you have that. So that's how that works. So the springs help to counteract the tension of the strings. Otherwise, this would just go completely forward. So what happens is, when you push down with this bar on the guitar, the strings go down in pitch, and they can go down quite far. That's why if you ever hear somebody say, "Do that dive bomb," yeah, you can even make it do. You can even do.
Can it do a lower note than the normal E, than the bass E?
No.
How far you go?
Barely a G.
Okay.
G, F sharp.
Okay.
And that's and you can do all sorts of cool stuff. You can do.
It sounds like a motorcycle.
Yeah, it sounds like a motor.
Not my Harley, but maybe like a Honda or something like that.
Oh, what? Wait, again. Do it again.
Yeah. So and actually, guys did this.
I think Hendrix did like motorcycle imitation with his guitar.
I never heard that before. Never would have thought of doing that.
Yeah, actually, you know who was famous for doing that? Look for the guitarist in the Meatloaf album "Bat Out of Hell."
Yeah.
Okay.
He did that,
That is hilarious. I never would have imagined that.
So that's.
But you ain't too rev match with your guitar. Anyway.
Anyways, we're probably getting on that long side here.
Yeah.
Do you have a quiz question for next week?
Oh, yes, I do. Okay, so now the quiz question for next week. I have to remember what I typed down in the syllabus.
You want me to check? Well, you,
No, I think I have the quiz.
While Willie's thinking,
Well,
we keep forgetting to tell you to like the videos or subscribe
Yeah.
if you want to see more of these. These are test videos, and we're planning on doing an initial number of them based on your response. So if you like to keep hearing discussions, but mainly lessons for the blind, please hit like. Please leave your comments and let us know what we can do.
oh yeah, please
And
do.
let us know if you want this to keep going.
Absolutely. So
Absolutely.
we're gonna do a general electric guitar question. We're gonna kind of go off of Van Halen for a little bit. We'll probably pick up back with him in the next lesson. But who was it that built the first successful commercially available solid body electric guitar?
Good question.
Good question.
Tune in to the next episode. You'll hear the answer and hear Willie's lesson on what song next.
We're gonna be doing Sweet Home Alabama.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. We'll see you in the next video.
Yep. Keep on playing.
Keep on.